And now joining us is Mike Keenan. Coach Keenan, it's Zach and Mike. Thanks for a few minutes, and how are you?
I'm super and appreciate you having me on.
Well, we
Good to
appreciate
talk hockey, Mr. Snyder.
Well, we appreciate you coming on, and thanks a million. So, you know how close this city is with that Snyder and how much he meant to this city. Just what was your reaction when you heard that the great Mr. Snyder passed away?
Well, you're always a little bit surprised or shocked when somebody does pass. I knew that he was sick and had been battling cancer now for a couple of years. But certainly it resonates when something like this happens.
Take me back to the first time you met Mr. Snyder, and what was your reaction of him?
Well, he was a very assertive individual. I had met him when I was being interviewed by the Flyers for the job, and that, in fact, was before Bobby Clark was hired as the manager. Jay Snyder and a group of individuals interviewed me, as well as Ed Snyder, and I found him very direct and very bright and very inquisitive, but very forthright.
He always had a presence, and he was always in that locker room. And you hear players now after his death and even before his death just talk about how much he meant to them. But tell me what your guys' relationship was like, since you were the head coach, and I'm sure you had many deep conversations with him.
Well, my relationship was pretty good. I can tell you a little anecdote and a little story that probably tells you a lot about Ed Snyder. When he hired me, he said, "Mike, if we win, or whether if we make the playoffs, I'll kiss your butt at center ice, because I don't think we have a very good team right now. Clark, Barber, and Sittler, Hall of Famers, were all leaving the team. So at the end of the season, with about 3 or 4 games left, he come running down the hall and said, the team's not prepared for playoffs. And I said, Mr. Snyder, you forget that you wanted to kiss my butt if we made the playoffs. Now we're going to win the President's Trophy. So what would you like to do? He just started to laugh, turned around, and walked away.
Well, it's his hockey team. I guess he doesn't have to kiss your butt.
Yeah. He punctuated how he felt, and that was really the relationship I had was fairly direct and honest and never a problem. Until he fired me, of course, or Bobby fired me. I'm not sure who did.
We're talking to Stanley Cup winning coach in Mike Keenan. And Coach, when you look at this current Flyers team, it's in a similar position. Not a lot of people thought that they'd make the playoffs. Now here they are, they're an 8th seed, and they're gaining a little bit of momentum. But when you look at the current team, a lot of people like to talk about the Jake Voraceks, the Wayne Simmons, the Claude Giroux, and then even the way that Shane Gostisbehere has come in and improved this team. How important is it to have a player like a Braden Shen who just adds so much depth to this forward line combinations?
Well, you have to have depth, but the thing that you have to realize is that they gained a lot of momentum, as you just mentioned. They were out of the playoffs for such a long time. They found a way to get themselves into that position, and now they got some momentum going into the playoffs. In today's NHL, that's all you need. You need to, first of all, qualify and then stay healthy and maybe grab some momentum and knock a team off or two.
And some people in the city, they love to joke about Dave Haxtell and his emotion on the bench because there's not a lot of smiling from Dave Haxtell. You yourself behind the bench didn't do a ton of smiling. Is that just a facade that you gave off, or were you just truly thinking that that was the best way to push everyone's buttons?
It wasn't something I thought about. It was just my own inner intensity, my intrinsic values for winning. I think the team felt it, and it wasn't something that I wanted to put on airs or practice. It was just me, and fortunately, I had that competitive fire and still do. So it served me well, and I think it helped the team, and they certainly fed off that type of demeanor.
Mike, when you guys were here in Philadelphia, you got to a Stanley Cup final, forced it to a Game 7, but in that series, you were down 3-1. How'd you motivate the team and get them to force that Game 7? Because we've seen that a few times in recent years in playoff series where teams get down 3-1 and then have a big-time comeback.
Well, you have to turn to the players, and we had been an experienced team. The fact that we'd been to the Stanley Cup before, excuse me, as I mentioned in my first year. So you go to the leadership group, and you go to the Dave Poulins, the Mark Howes, and Tim Kerr, and Brian Propp, the senior people on the team, and you look at your goaltender now, it's Hextall, not Lindbergh. And we had a very great group of people, the Rick Tockett's of the world had matured so much, and the Ronnie Sutters and Peter Zezel, the youngsters, and with the scoring with Sinisalo, and Craven had speed. So, and we had toughness with Brown and Stanley, Knockbauer, Samuelson, who came after we lost McCrimmon. So I can name every player and every line combination for you on that team right now, and that you just turn to the players and try to give them some structure, and then you rely on their values for competition and their confidence. You give them confidence, tell them you believe in them, and then you compete and look for a good result.
You probably weren't thinking it when he was a player, but Ron has really turned into a really good GM, and he's done a special job with this team, getting them back in that right direction of what many people consider as good Flyers hockey. Did you see any traits in Ron when he was a player that made you think that he could be a good GM?
Well, the one trait that everyone saw, including myself, was his competitive nature, which I just described. And when you have somebody that's that hungry to win and that competitive to win and has the intelligence, you know he has something to bring to the table. He schooled himself. He learned his craft about being a manager quite a bit in Los Angeles, and then he's brought that experience to the Flyers, and he knows the setting. He knows what the team should represent, and he knows the city. And I think that's a great combination of competitiveness, experience, surfacing, and finding out. And he definitely knows how to win as a team. And I think that's being exhibited now.
You had a tremendous 4-year run here with the Flyers. When you take a look back at those days, is there anything you regret about your time here or you would do differently?
Yeah, I regret getting fired. I didn't deserve to be fired. We won 3 or 4 divisional titles, the President's Trophy and Stanley Cup twice. So that's the only thing I regret about leaving the Flyers.
And you talk about President's Trophy. You're 1 year in New York. You win the President's Trophy. You go on to win the Stanley Cup after 54 years of that franchise not winning a Stanley Cup. Now you look at the Capitals. They are the President's Trophy winners. They have yet to win a Stanley Cup in their franchise history. Philadelphia has to go up against those President's Trophy winning Capitals from both ends. How do the Capitals make sure they don't let down against the Flyers because your Rangers didn't? And then if you were on the Flyers bench, how do they overcome that and upset the number 1 seeded Capitals?
Well, the Capitals have a definite focus to have the year they had. They're on a mission. They're on a mission to win. But the level of competition in the league, as it was in our case, even in '94, we came within 1 overtime loss against New Jersey of being eliminated. So it's very, very tight. Healthy teams are a big part of it. Confident teams. And having your best players, in Washington's case, continue to elevate their game. And the Flyers, they're in a situation, it's a no-lose mentality. They're probably not expected to beat the Capitals. So there's a little bit more mental pressure, if you like, on the Capitals. However, Philadelphia is going to have some certain expectations from themselves, from each other, to be able to elevate their games, to be able to beat a team of that stature.
And now you've been to the playoffs multiple times with multiple teams. If you had to pinpoint 1 or 2 things that are the difference in playoff series, what would they be?
Well, the number 1 thing is your goaltender. He's got to be superb to win the Stanley Cup or to succeed in Stanley Cup playoffs. And the second is that your best players absolutely have to be at their very best. They have to lead the group. And you have to rely on them and give them the responsibility. I think that coaches sometimes understand that, sometimes don't, but I was always known to play my best players the most. And you win with your best or lose with your best. I think that if you understand that, then you've got an opportunity to succeed.
And one of those teams that you really need to see their best players come alive to have a chance to get back to the Stanley Cup Finals. A team you used to coach in the Rangers, and they've been close the last 2 years. A loss to the Kings, and then a loss in the Eastern Conference Final the following year to Tampa Bay. One guy that hasn't played so great in the playoffs has been a Rick Nash. What kind of run do you expect out of Rick Nash in these Stanley Cup playoffs?
Well, he's got the capability of being a game breaker, and he's got to decide when he's going to meet that threshold, or if he's capable. I don't know him as a person, and I don't know his confidence levels. I don't know how he feels about himself. But from the outside, obviously, he's got the skill set to be a difference maker. And as I just pointed out, those are the people you have to rely on. The Rangers, you want to talk about them a little bit. They got superb goaltending, but the Nashes of the world have to step up and be their best players.
Now, before we let you run, as we're talking to Mike Keenan on the way out here with the Stanley Cup winning head coach and the former coach of the Flyers as well from 84 to 88, that Rangers run in 94, you mentioned it, the Stefan Monteau goal was massive to punch you guys into the final. Then you win in Game 7 at home at Madison Square Garden. Everyone remembers the scene of Marc Messier coming to get the cup and how much it meant to that city. When you take a look back at 94, just what are some things that stand out to you about that team that you had?
Well, it was an interesting team. It was the team that we developed over time. When we first got there, the team had not made the playoffs in the previous season, and we had to restructure it from a personnel point of view. It was an ongoing process, even up to the point where we were in first place at the trading deadline, and we still traded for 5 players to ensure that we had the depth, the size, and that was a big part of. We needed to have a big team because we knew New Jersey did to be able to get by them. And then the leadership from the best players, going right to Marc Messier. He was poised and ready to bring a championship to the city, and he made sure that the superstars, Brian Leetch and Mike Richter, Adam Graves, are all on board. And then we had a great group of talented people after that, like Kova, Weimer, and Keenan. And you mentioned Matt Toll, McTavish, and Noonan, one of the best checking lines in the history of the game. And role players after that, like Gilbert and Kosher and Eddie Olchek and Nemchinov are Russian. And the Russians were poised, too. It was the first Russian players to win the Cup. So it came together nicely.
And there was a lot of pressure on you to win that year. And, in Philadelphia as well, there's a lot of pressure on the Flyers, just how much both of those fan bases demand out of their team. As a coach, how do you handle high expectations like you had in some years when you were coaching?
Well, I was fortunate in that I had the same mental set. I had no interest in coaching a team that didn't have the expectations to win a Stanley Cup. And I was criticized considerably for it, but those were my expectations, and it was a matter of are we getting better, or are we getting worse? Are we an underdog, or are we a competitor, or are we a favorite? And I tried to push the team to be a favorite when we had the time to do that, to get them there. As I described to the Rangers, a non-playoff team all of a sudden wins the President's Trophy and the Stanley Cup. Well, it took a lot of work to accelerate that process in that year and push them to that point. So my own personal feeling about coaching is I'd rather have the pressure on me and the expectations than not.
I don't know how much you still get to watch the Flyers, but before we let you run, Dave Haxtell, this is his first year in the Stanley Cup playoffs, his first year in the NHL after having an enormous amount of success in college. Just what advice would you give to Dave Haxtell if you could talk to him about getting ready to play in the Stanley Cup playoffs?
Well, he's a young guy, and I would say just continue to believe in your own beliefs, because that's what's gotten the team there, and he's had some winning experience, and believe in your own winning approach. And I think that this is not an easy task, but he's got to stay consistent and stay confident in himself and his group.
Mike Keenan, we appreciate the time. Thanks for your insight as always.
Thank you so much.
There is Mike.
The Snyder family from me. Thank you.
No doubt about that. There is Mike Keenan joining us on the hotline, WHIP Radio in Philadelphia. Time in the WHIP studios is 11:30, and it's time for a WHIP Sports Update.